The champagne flute shattered against Italian marble first, a crystalline explosion that cut through the symphony of polite conversation like a gunshot. Then Jed Mead's shoulder dislocated with a wet pop that made even the most hardened criminals in the room flinch. 3 seconds. One controlled strike. And the most aggressive rival in the metropolitan and underworld hit the ballroom floor like a puppet with severed strings. Carla stood over him, midnight blue gown pooling around her Louboutins, breathing steady as if she'd done nothing more strenuous than adjust her hair. The silence that followed was absolute. 200 of the city's criminal elite frozen mid-sip, mid-laugh, mid-deal. Mead's enforcers reached for concealed weapons, hands hovering near jacket linings, but confusion paralyzed them. Their boss had just been dropped by a woman who looked like she belonged in a museum, not a war zone. Jed Mead groaned on the floor, his face pressed against marble that cost more per square foot than most people's cars. His arm hung at an unnatural angle, the shoulder she destroyed already swelling beneath his custom Armani. He'd put his hands on Walter, grabbed him by the lapels in front of everyone, making it a territorial display, a dominance play. Stupid. So monumentally stupid. Across the ballroom, Walter L. Givens hadn't moved. The city's most calculated crime lord stood perfectly still, champagne glass motionless in his hand, dark eyes locked on his wife of 3 years. The quiet former soldier he'd married for appearances. The decorative legitimacy he'd installed in his penthouse and his life. The woman he thought he knew, except he'd never known her at all. Carla met his gaze over the crowd of frozen faces and designer gowns. For 3 years, she'd played this role perfectly. The soft-spoken wife who arranged flowers and attended charity events, who smiled at the right moments and never asked questions about blood on his shirts. For 3 years, she'd been patient, careful, invisible, but Walter was hers. The arrangement might have started as a transaction, citizenship and protection for her, respectability for him, but somewhere in the quiet mornings and careful distance, that had changed. At least for her. And nobody put their hands on what was hers. Security cameras mounted in crystal chandeliers captured everything. The feeds would be analyzed, dissected, replayed in back rooms across the city by morning. Every family, every crew, every two-bit hustler with aspirations would see this moment. The moment Walter L. Givens' trophy wife revealed she'd never been a trophy at all. Just a weapon, waiting for someone stupid enough to force her hand. Carla smoothed her gown with steady fingers, stepped over Mead's writhing form without looking down, and walked toward Walter. Her heels clicked against marble in the absolute silence. 200 witnesses held their collective breath. This was how wars started in the underworld. With disrespect. With blood. With a woman in a midnight blue gown teaching everyone a lesson they'd never forget. They lived like polite strangers in a penthouse designed for intimacy. Separate bedrooms on opposite ends of the 14th floor. Breakfast at 7, where Walter read intelligence reports disguised as financial newspapers, while Carla studied Korean verb conjugations disguised as fashion magazines. Dinner at 8 when he was in town, which was maybe 3 nights a week. Conversations that never went deeper than weather and wine selections. 3 years of this careful choreography. 3 years of sleeping alone in a California king while her husband, legally, contractually, on every piece of paper that mattered, slept 60 feet away behind a door that never opened. The arrangement had been clean. Carla needed citizenship after her military discharge, needed to disappear from certain databases, needed legitimacy that didn't involve questions about 6 years of combat operations she couldn't discuss. Walter L. Givens needed a wife. Not for love, crime lords didn't do love, but for the optics. The mayor's charity dinners. The opera box seats. The hospital wing donations that bought influence, and made him look like a legitimate businessman instead of what he actually was. So they'd made a deal. Marriage license, separate lives, mutual benefit. Carla folded her Korean textbook, genuine this time, not camouflage, and watched Walter through the kitchen's breakfast bar. He was beautiful in the morning light, all sharp angles and controlled power in a silk robe that probably cost more than her entire military salary had been. Dark eyes scanning reports about shipments and territories, fingers drumming patterns against his coffee cup that she'd learned meant he was calculating probabilities. She'd memorized those patterns. Memorized everything about him, actually, in the 18 months since she'd started paying attention. His security rotations changed every 11 days. He trusted exactly 4 people completely: his driver, his lawyer, his cousin Marcus, and nobody else. He took his coffee black, his whiskey neat, and his threats seriously. He'd killed 7 people personally that she knew of, and probably dozens more through orders. And he had no idea she'd been cataloging his vulnerabilities like a military target assessment. Not because she planned to use them. Because she was dying of boredom playing the decorative wife, and analyzing security patterns was better than another charity luncheon discussion about floral arrangements. "The gala is tomorrow," Walter said without looking up. First words he'd spoken to her in 16 hours. "Meade will be there." Carla's fingers stilled on her textbook. Jed Meade. The brutal rival who'd been pushing into Walter's territories for 6 months, all aggression and no finesse. "Should I wear the blue dress?" She kept her voice light. "Decorative. Or the black?" "Blue." Walter's eyes finally lifted to hers, dark and unreadable across the distance they always maintained. "You look untouchable in blue." 3 feet of empty space between them at the breakfast bar. 3 years of empty space in a marriage that existed only on paper. Carla smiled her perfect wife's smile. "Blue it is." She didn't tell him she'd been tracking Meade's patterns too. Didn't mention she knew exactly how dangerous tomorrow would be. The Venetian chandeliers cast amber light across crystal and silk, turning the ballroom into something between a cathedral and a counting house. $300,000 per table. Every crime family in the metropolitan area represented. Champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent flowing like water while politicians and criminals pretended not to recognize each other. Carla stood near the bar, playing her role perfectly, the decorative wife, present but not intrusive, beautiful but not distracting. Walter was across the room negotiating something with the Harbor Commission president. She'd learned not to hover. Trophy wives didn't hover. Jed Meade appeared at her elbow like a bad smell in expensive cologne. "Mrs. Givens." His smile showed too many teeth. "Your husband leaves you unattended. Careless." She kept her expression pleasant, neutral. "Mr. Meade. Enjoying the evening?" "I am now." He moved past her, shoulders brushing with deliberate invasion of space, heading directly toward Walter. She watched him cross the ballroom floor, watched the predatory confidence in his gait. His hands bunched the fabric of Walter's custom Tom Ford jacket. Territorial. Possessive. A dominance display that made every conversation in the vicinity stop cold. Carla's champagne flute hit the marble floor before conscious thought intervened. She crossed 12 feet in 3 strides, seized Meade's wrist with her left hand while her right drove a controlled strike into his shoulder joint, angle, leverage, force, exactly the way Sergeant Morrison had taught her in advanced combat training. The joint dislocated with a wet pop that silenced the entire ballroom. Meade dropped like a stone, his expensive suit crumpling as he hit the floor. His scream was high and shocked. The silence afterward was absolute. Meade's enforcers reached for weapons, then froze, confusion written across their faces. Their boss was on the ground. A woman in a ball gown had put him there. Protocol didn't cover this. Walter's security detail moved closer, hands inside jackets. 200 of the city's criminal elite stood frozen, champagne glasses suspended midair, waiting to see how this would play. Carla looked down at Meade, writhing on marble that cost more than his life was worth. "You put your hands on my husband," she said, voice steady and cold as winter. "That has consequences." She stepped over him without looking back, smoothed her midnight blue gown, and walked toward Walter. Her heels clicked in the absolute silence. Every eye followed her movement. Walter's expression was unreadable, controlled fury masking something else, something that looked almost like recognition. His security created a corridor through the frozen crowd. They left without speaking, without looking back at the chaos erupting behind them. The car ride home stretched silent and taut as a tripwire. Walter sat 3 feet away on the leather seat, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the passing city lights. Not looking at her. Processing. Seeing her, finally, after 3 years of careful blindness. The decorative wife was gone. The performance was over. And Carla had no idea what happened next. The penthouse door closed behind them with a sound like a cell locking. Walter's security stayed in the hallway, smart, considering the tension crackling between them like live current. He poured 2 whiskeys without asking, slid one across the marble counter toward her. 3 feet of distance, as always. His hand was steady. Hers was too. But something fundamental had shifted in the space between them. "You've been trained." Not a question. His voice was controlled, measured. The same tone he used when calculating whether someone lived or died. Military. Carla picked up the whiskey, didn't drink. 6 years. Combat specialist. Honorably discharged. Honorably. A muscle ticked in his jaw. But not quietly. No. Not quietly. Walter's fingers drummed that pattern against his glass, the one that meant he was recalculating probabilities, reassessing variables. The shoulder dislocation. That was textbook. Advanced hand-to-hand. Sergeant Morrison's favorite technique. She met his eyes across the counter. Clean, effective, leaves them alive to regret it. "What else haven't you told me?" "You never ask." The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Walter set his glass down with careful precision. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more dangerous. 3 years, Carla. 3 years of this arrangement. I gave you space. Privacy. I never pushed. No, you didn't. She finally drank. Let the whiskey burn. You kept exactly 3 feet of distance at all times. Separate bedrooms. Separate lives. A marriage that existed on paper and nowhere else. That was the deal. It was. She set her glass down, mirrored his careful precision. Until somewhere around month 6, when I realized the deal wasn't enough anymore. But you seemed content with the arrangement, so I stayed quiet. Played my role. Walter's expression cracked, just slightly. After tonight, everyone knows this marriage isn't what we've been pretending. Was it ever? The question hung between them like smoke. Or have we both been pretending it was pretend? He moved around the counter, closing half the distance but stopping short. Still that careful space. What else, Carla? What else have you been hiding while playing decorative? I've been tracking your security vulnerabilities for 18 months. She watched his eyes widen just slightly. Your rotation patterns change every 11 days, but follow a predictable algorithm. Your northeast warehouse has blind spots in camera coverage. Your driver takes the same route home every night. Exploitable. Meade knew about the 3rd floor entry point before you did. I've been cataloging everything. Why? Because I was dying of boredom, and analyzing tactical weaknesses is more interesting than arranging flowers. She paused. And because someone needed to be watching your back. Walter stared at her like he'd never seen her before. Maybe he hadn't. My decorative wife, he said slowly, has been running counterintelligence on my empire. Your wife, Carla corrected, has been keeping you alive while you assumed she was harmless. The distance between them felt suddenly smaller, suddenly charged with 3 years of unasked questions and unspoken truths. Who are you? Walter's voice was almost gentle. I'm exactly who you married, Carla said. You just never looked closely enough to see. The city lights spread below them like scattered diamonds as Walter unrolled shipping manifests across his office desk. 2 a.m. Coffee instead of whiskey. And Carla sitting across from him for the first time in 3 years, actually involved in the work that funded their carefully separated lives. Mead moves product through 3 primary routes. Walter pointed to marked locations. We hit his warehouses. He retaliates on ours. Standard escalation. Carla studied the maps with the same focus she'd once used on enemy territory assessments. You're thinking like criminals. Turf wars, direct confrontation. We are criminals. You are. She traced a finger along shipping routes. I'm military. And military doesn't engage where the enemy expects. We cut supply lines. She tapped the harbor manifests. Meat shipments come through commercial containers, yes? Hidden in legitimate cargo. Walter leaned forward, watching her think. Furniture imports from Southeast Asia. Which means customs documentation, bills of lading, inspection schedules. Her eyes tracked patterns he'd never noticed. You don't need to hit his warehouses. You need one well-placed tip to customs about irregular weight discrepancies in container shipments. Let the federal government do your work. The silence that followed was Walter recalculating everything he thought he knew about warfare. That's brilliant, he said quietly. That's logistics. But she smiled just slightly. Sergeant Morrison used to say the best victories are the ones your enemy doesn't realize you orchestrated. By week 2, Mead had lost 3 shipments to customs inspections. By week 3, his suppliers were questioning his operational security. Walter's team started coming to Carla for strategic guidance, hesitant at first, then with increasing respect when her plans worked cleaner than anything they'd tried before. The late nights became routine. Strategy sessions in Walter's office. Carla curled in the leather chair he'd had brought in specifically for her. Maps and intelligence reports spread between them. The 3 feet of careful distance collapsed into casual proximity, his hand on her shoulder when pointing at documents, her fingers brushing his when passing coffee, the space between them shrinking in increments that felt inevitable. He's hemorrhaging money, Walter said one night, satisfaction evident in his voice. His organization is fracturing. Good. Carla marked another custom schedule. Fractures create opportunities. Walter watched her work, this woman he'd lived beside for 3 years without really seeing. When did this become an us? The question came out quieter than he'd intended. When did it stop being an arrangement? She looked up, met his eyes across intelligence reports and cooling coffee. Probably month 6. Like everything else. You never said anything. Neither did you. I thought. He stopped, reconsidered. I thought you wanted the distance. I thought you did. Carla set down her pen. We're really good at pretending, apparently. Not anymore. Walter moved around the desk, closing the last of the space between them. After the gala, after this, there's no going back to separate bedrooms and polite stranger routine. No, she agreed. There isn't. His hand found hers, warm and certain. So what do? We finish what Mead started, Carla said. Together. And then we figure out what we actually are. Partners? For a start. Walter found her at the corner coffee shop on 5th and Lexington at exactly 9:15 for the fourth consecutive morning. Same table by the window. Same unobstructed view of the street. Same position that made her visible to anyone watching. He slid into the seat across from her with controlled fury radiating off him like heat. You've made yourself a standing target. Carla sipped her cappuccino, didn't look up from her book. Korean philosophy this time, no longer hiding what she was learning. I've made myself bait. That's the same thing. It's really not. She finally met his eyes. A target gets shot. Bait draws attention exactly where you want it. Walter's jaw tightened. Meade has 3 surveillance teams watching this location. I counted them on the way in. 4, actually. You missed the one in the dry cleaner across the street. She turned a page. They've been there since day 2. And you're sitting here like you're on display. I am on display. Carla set down her book with careful precision. Because while Meade's people are watching me drink overpriced coffee, they're not planning your assassination. They're not analyzing your route patterns or bribing your security. They're focused on me. Exactly my point. Your point is protection. Her voice stayed level, but something sharp cut through underneath. Mine is partnership. There's a difference. The argument that followed was quiet enough not to draw attention, but sharp enough to draw blood. Walter wanted her safe, protected, back in the penthouse where Meade couldn't reach her. Carla wanted him to trust that she knew what she was doing, that 6 years of military training meant something, that she wasn't decorative anymore, and he needed to stop treating her like she was. This coffee shop has 4 exits, she said finally, calm as a tactical briefing. 2 standard, 1 through the kitchen, 1 emergency fire exit. I designed overlapping security coverage with your team. Marcus has the north approach. Chun has south. Rivera floats. Every angle covered. Meade's people see me exposed, but I'm in a kill box of our making. Walter stared at her. You coordinated with my security team. They take my orders now. Didn't Marcus mention it? She picked up her coffee. I'm repositioning Meade's attention away from you and onto a controlled scenario. I'm not bait, Walter. I'm an asset. The fury in his expression shifted into something else, recognition, maybe. Or the painful process of letting go of assumptions he'd held for 3 years. You could get killed. So could you. That's why I'm doing this. Carla's voice softened, just slightly. Partnership means trusting me to fight beside you, not behind you. I've spent 3 years keeping you separate from this. I was never separate. I was just waiting for you to notice. She reached across the table, found his hand. Vulnerability doesn't mean weakness. It means trusting someone enough to fight beside you instead of protecting them from the war. Walter's fingers tightened around hers. If anything happens to you, then you'll dismantle whoever did it. She smiled, small and fierce. But it won't, because I'm very good at what I do, and you're finally letting me do it. Across the street, Meade's surveillance team kept watching. Carla kept drinking her coffee, playing bait with military precision. And Walter started learning what partnership actually meant. Tuesday morning, 9:17. The smallest window in her security rotation, 45 seconds between Marcus repositioning and Chen's visual contact. Meade's crew had been watching long enough to find it. The chloroform-soaked cloth came from behind, professional and quick. Carla's hand found the panic button sewn into her coat, lining even as consciousness faded, pressing it twice in the sequence that meant abduction, not death. Then darkness. Walter was in a meeting with his accountant when his phone vibrated with the alert pattern that stopped his heart. 2 pulses. Abduction code. Carla's tracker showing movement toward the industrial district. Absolute terror felt different than he'd imagined. Colder. More clarifying. Like every careful calculation in his life suddenly meant nothing compared to 6 hours of not knowing if she was alive. Carla woke with zip ties cutting into her wrists and 3 guards who'd clearly never dealt with anyone trained in escape and evasion. They'd left her shoes on, first mistake. Tied her hands in front instead of behind, second mistake. Put her in a warehouse with exposed pipes and sharp corners, third and fatal mistake. She cataloged the space with clinical precision. 2 guards playing cards near the door. 1 patrolling. Meets lieutenant. She recognized him from surveillance photos, sitting in the office with a phone, probably waiting for ransom instructions. 6 hours. She gave herself 6 hours before Walter's team would track the signal. She needed 4. The zip ties came off using the edge of a metal shelf bracket. The first guard went down when she used her shoe heel as a striking weapon. Louboutins were surprisingly effective when applied to the temple with sufficient force. The second guard got a forearm to the throat, pressure on the carotid until he dropped. Mead's lieutenant barely had time to stand before she had him cable-tied to his own office chair with his belt securing his mouth. When Walter's team breached the warehouse, Marcus first through the door, weapon drawn, they found her standing over 3 unconscious men in a torn Dior dress, breathing hard but composed. Walter came through 30 seconds later, and his composure shattered completely. 6 hours. His voice cracked on the words. 6 hours, I thought I'd lost you. He crossed the warehouse floor in 5 strides, hands framing her face, searching for injuries with an intensity that made her chest tight. This was Walter with no walls, no calculation, just raw terror bleeding out in a dark warehouse that smelled like oil and fear. I'm fine, Carla said. I handled it. I know you did. I can see that. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, gentle despite the violence surrounding them. But 6 hours of not knowing if you were alive, if they'd hurt you, if I'd. He stopped, swallowed hard. I love you. This stopped being transactional a long time ago. Probably the first morning you sat across from me reading Korean textbooks and pretending they were fashion magazines. Carla felt something crack open in her chest, 3 years of careful distance finally collapsing completely. I know, she said softly. Me too. Since month 6, remember? Month 6, he repeated, almost laughing. We wasted 3 years. We did. She pulled him closer despite the armed security team tactfully looking elsewhere. Let's not waste any more. He kissed her in a warehouse full of unconscious criminals, and it felt like coming home. Dawn painted the city gold and rose from the penthouse rooftop garden. Walter had draped his jacket over Carla's shoulders. She was still barefoot, her ruined Louboutins left somewhere in the warehouse. The terrace furniture held morning dew, so they stood at the railing, watching the city wake up below them. Month 6, Walter said quietly. What happened in month 6? Carla pulled his jacket tighter, breathing an expensive cologne and gunpowder residue. You made breakfast. I came out of my room and you'd made actual breakfast, eggs, toast, coffee, and you looked almost embarrassed about it. Said you'd made too much. Did I want some? We ate together, and you told me about the opera you'd seen the night before. Talked for 40 minutes about music theory and stage design, like I was someone whose opinion mattered.
She paused.
Nobody had done that in years.
Just talk to me.
Like I was a person, not a transaction. That's when you fell in love? Scrambled eggs and opera criticism. That's when I realized the arrangement wasn't going to be enough. She turned to face him. What about you? When did it change? Walter was quiet for a long moment, fingers drumming that calculation pattern against the railing. Month 4. You were reading in the living room, actually reading, not pretending. I came home covered in someone else's blood, and you looked up, saw me, and just said, Bathroom's clear, I'll make tea. No questions. No judgment. No using my vulnerability as leverage. His jaw tightened. Everyone I've ever trusted tried to use it against me eventually. You just made tea. I was military. I understood coming home bloody.
I know.
That's why it mattered. He touched her face, gentle despite hands that had killed. My previous engagement ended when she tried to blackmail me using information I'd shared in confidence. Learned vulnerability meant giving someone ammunition. My previous engagement ended with a breakup email while I was deployed, Carla said. Military boyfriend who said loving someone who might not come home was too hard. Learned vulnerability meant eventual abandonment. They stood in the growing light, two people who'd built walls so high they'd almost missed each other entirely. Last night, Walter said, when I got that alert, when I thought I might lose you, I would have burned the empire to get you back. All of it. Everything I've built. That's not transactional.
No.
His thumb traced her cheekbone. It's really not. Carla caught his hand, held it against her face. I don't want the arrangement anymore. The separate bedrooms, the careful distance, the pretending we're strangers who share an address. She met his eyes. I want the real thing. The messy, terrifying, vulnerable real thing where we actually choose each other. Even knowing what I am, what my world involves. I just escaped a kidnapping before your rescue team arrived. I think I can handle your world. She smiled, small and fierce. Question is, can you handle mine? Can you let me be your partner, not your protected asset? Walter pulled her closer, eliminating the last inches of careful distance they'd maintained for 3 years. Partners. Equals. No more pretending. No more pretending, she agreed. He kissed her as the sun cleared the horizon, and it tasted like honesty. Like choosing each other consciously instead of hiding behind contracts and careful performance. Like the death of their transactional marriage and the beginning of something real. Below them, the city moved. Above them, the sky opened into morning. And between them, finally, no distance at all. The war room emerged in what had been Walter's private office. Now there's maps and intelligence reports covering every surface. 2 chairs behind the desk instead of one. Carla worked in bare feet and one of Walter's shirts, hair pulled back, marking target locations with the precision of a military campaign. Walter watched her orchestrate his empire's resources like a conductor leading a symphony of calculated destruction. Meets protection rackets depend on fear of retaliation, she said, tapping 3 locations on the city map. Remove the fear, the clients walk. We don't need to fight his enforcers. We just need his businesses to stop paying.
How?
Anonymous tips to the police about his enforcement patterns. Let law enforcement pick up his muscle for assault charges. Witnesses suddenly willing to testify when the threat's in custody. She smiled, sharp as a blade. It's not warfare. It's chess. Week 1. Meade lost his smuggling routes to customs investigations Carla orchestrated through carefully placed intelligence. Week 2, his primary suppliers switched allegiance after Walter offered better terms. Negotiation tactics Carla had mapped out based on the suppliers' financial vulnerabilities she'd identified. Week 3, 3 of Meade's protection rackets dissolved when his enforcers got arrested following anonymous tips timed to Carla's precision. For million in losses. Half his network destroyed. Not a single direct confrontation. The criminal underworld started whispering. Not about Walter L. Given's ruthlessness. They'd known about that for years. About his wife. The woman who dislocated Jed Meade's shoulder at a charity gala and then systematically dismantled his empire using tactics none of them had seen coming. She thinks like military, not criminal, Marcus reported during a security briefing. It's terrifying. She's 3 moves ahead of everyone. Walter glanced at Carla, who was analyzing shipping manifests with a focus she'd once probably used on enemy supply lines. "She is terrifying," he agreed. "She's also right about everything." They moved through the city's elite circles as a unified force now. No more careful distance, no more pretending. Carla at his side during negotiations, her tactical mind catching details his criminal instincts missed. Walter trusting her judgment on operational decisions, letting her redirect his resources with military efficiency. Partners in every sense that mattered. Meade became increasingly desperate.
Sloppy.
His retaliation attempts failed because Carla had predicted them, positioned countermeasures, turned his aggression into additional vulnerabilities. Every move he made accelerated his own destruction. "He's fracturing," Walter said one night, studying reports of Meade's organization splintering. "His people are jumping ship." "Good." Carla marked another location on their tactical map. "Means we're ready for the endgame." "Which is?" "We give him one final option. Leave the city voluntarily, or we dismantle what's left of his operations so thoroughly there's nothing left but arrest warrants and bankruptcy." She looked up, eyes sharp and certain. "He won't take it. His ego won't let him. So we'll finish what he started at the gala." Walter moved behind her chair, hands on her shoulders, studying the tactical map she'd created. 3 weeks ago, this had been his empire, his war, his problem. Now it was theirs, planned together, executed together, won together. "Ready to end this?" he asked. "Always." Carla leaned back against him, comfortable in the partnership they'd built from the ruins of their arrangement. "Let's remind Jed Meade why putting his hands on you was the worst mistake he ever made. They came for Meade on his own territory because symbols mattered in the criminal underworld. The warehouse district where he'd held court for 15 years, where his enforcers gathered, where he felt untouchable. Walter's convoy arrived at midnight. 6 cars, 20 armed men, and Carla in a white gown that caught streetlight like a declaration of war. Call back to the gala. Deliberate. Unmistakable. Meade waited in his warehouse office, surrounded by what remained of his crew. Desperate men with nothing left to lose. He'd rejected their offer to leave the city, called it weakness, promised he'd make them pay for every loss they'd inflicted. His ego wouldn't let him see the trap closing until it had already sprung. Walter entered first, controlled violence in an expensive suit. Carla followed in white silk and bare confidence, the woman who destroyed Meade's empire without firing a single shot. "You should have taken the exit we offered," Walter said quietly. Meade's hand went to his waistband, pulled the gun with shaking fingers, aimed it at Carla. "Still think she's untouchable? She's just leverage Givens. Always has been." Carla smiled, cold and sharp. "You still don't understand. I'm not his weakness." She moved before Meade's finger found the trigger. "I'm the weapon." 3 seconds. The disarm was textbook. Redirect the barrel, control the wrist, apply pressure until bones ground together, and the gun clattered to concrete. Meade hit the floor hard, Carla's knee in his spine, his arm twisted at an angle that promised permanent damage if he moved wrong. "Your choice," she said, voice steady despite the violence. "Surrender or stop breathing." Meade's remaining enforcers reached for weapons, then froze as Walter's security team filled every doorway, weapons drawn, exits covered. The math was simple. Meade's crew was outgunned, outmaneuvered, and their boss was on the ground with a woman in a white gown controlling whether he'd ever use his arm again. "Stand down," Meade gasped. Across the city, coordinated raids hit all his remaining operations simultaneously. Carla's planning, Walter's resources, executed with military precision. The empire that had taken Meade 15 years to build fell in 4 hours. 3 months later, another charity gala. Same ballroom, same amber light from Venetian chandeliers, Same criminal elite pretending to be respectable. But everything had changed. Carla and Walter entered together. No careful distance, no pretense of arrangement. She wore midnight blue again. He wore certainty, and every conversation quieted as they passed. The woman who dislocated Jed, Meade's shoulder. The strategist who dismantled his empire. The partnership that had become legend. They're still staring, Carla murmured. Let them. Walter's hand found the small of her back, casual possession that would have been impossible 4 months ago. You earned it. We earned it. She caught his hand, laced their fingers together. That's what partnerships do. They moved through the gala together, elegant, sophisticated, absolutely lethal. The trophy wife who'd become a warrior queen. The arranged marriage that had transformed into the city's most feared alliance. No more separate bedrooms, no more polite stranger routine, no more pretending they were anything other than what they'd chosen to become. Equal. Partners. Unstoppable. And completely, terrifyingly in love. The champagne flowed. The city's elite whispered. And Carla and Walter owned the room the way they owned everything else now. Together, with precision and certainty and the kind of partnership that reshapes worlds. The arrangement was dead. Long live the marriage.